Prototyping is often the most exciting part of the journey. This is where the idea is going to come to life. This is where you can start to touch and hold and test something and actually have something for the first time maybe that you can use for its intended purpose and start to see whether you're actually getting the benefits to the end user that you thought you might. I would say that it's critical that you know exactly what you want to do with each prototype at every stage, and you're very clear with whoever's making it for you about what you want to test. Inevitably, it'll be more than just one prototype that you're creating, and Dyson's famous even on his products nowadays for doing hundreds of prototypes before launching the final product. Most product design companies that you might look to work with to produce prototypes for your product will try and do it in something like 2 or 3 prototypes. But what you'll find is that your design and your ideas and the product develops and evolves through those different prototypes to get something that is better for the end user, maybe more efficient to manufacture, or is simpler for everyone to kind of understand and operate. So don't try and cut out all of those prototypes and do it on an absolute shoestring, because what you'll probably end up with is an inferior product. You may even end up with a product that's actually costing you more to manufacture because it hasn't been refined as much as it could have been through prototyping. But as I say, the key thing is you know what you want out of every prototype. So for example, if you've built a proof of concept, you've proven the basic functionality, you now know there's a whole load of changes you want to make into your next prototype, it's often sensible for that prototype to be relatively low fidelity. So you don't want to probably waste a whole lot of money spray painting it or doing it in the final materials and colours and finishes. You just want something that functions and you can prove all of the next level of functionality before then going on to a final prototype that's all of the right material finishes and colours and looks perfect. The problem is if you try and do too much too quickly in a prototype, you just get to a point of going, okay, well I spent a lot of money because it's got all the right colours and everything else on it, but now actually having tested it and tried it and done some market research, I know that there's 4 or 5 things I need to change, and all of that extra effort making it really high fidelity and really nice and looking amazing was actually just wasted because I've now got to go and make another prototype anyway. Reasons for prototyping include proving core functionality, testing with the end user to make sure it's something that they find of benefit, presenting to investors to release the next stage of funding. Sometimes you might want to produce a nice looking prototype because actually you're trying to do some crowdfunding and you need to video that in order to launch the campaign. And they're all very valid reasons for prototyping, but the key thing really is to work out what you want to do, work out what you're going to test, and then produce the prototype to achieve that and no more. And if you're going to use a distributor for your product, you might be able to get away with showing them a high fidelity prototype to get them on board with it and excited about it, to start talking to them about costings and all those kind of other elements before you then commit to the finalizing of that product and putting it into production. Now, going into production can be really quite expensive, and so it often is worth validating it earlier on. But what I would say, if you're going to a retailer, they're going to expect to see a final product, but with a distributor, you might be able to get away with, as I say, a high fidelity prototype. We have been involved in many crowdfunding campaigns that have been successfully run off high fidelity prototypes. What I would say about crowdfunding is that they don't often allow computer aided design images. They do want to see video of actual working prototype. But nevertheless, it's a lot cheaper to do that. Hopefully raise your target via crowdfunding, which is all pre-ordered, so you're not giving away any percentage of your business or anything. But if you can raise the money for the production tooling and that first batch through something like a crowdfunding campaign, then that clearly reduces your financial risk significantly. Prototyping often involves physically making the prototype, but before then you often need to go through computer-aided design to actually create all of the files for the components that can then be 3D printed, for example, to make the prototype. Textile products are slightly different. That still is normally done with detailed design drawings before prototyping, but with a hard goods product, so anything that's made out of hard plastics or metals, ceramics or any of that type of thing, is often built as a 3D virtual model that can be fully reviewed before you go into prototyping. And the reason is twofold really. Often you need those CAD files to actually go and build a prototype at all, because 3D printing is used for most prototypes in one way or another these days. But the other reason is if it's built as a virtual model, you can then spin it around and cross-section it and examine it from all angles, and you can take a decision about whether you're happy with that before you commit to the cost of prototyping. And often what happens is there'll be a series of small iterative changes on that CAD model, and it's a lot cheaper to change it in the digital environment before going into prototyping than it is to get that first prototype and then say, well, actually I wish it was 5mm bigger here, or I want 2 more buttons here, or whatever it is. So making those changes in the virtual 3D model is a lot quicker and more cost effective as a result. And prototyping will generally involve doing a computer-aided design stage or a detailed design drawing stage if it's a textile product. It'll then involve producing a prototype, and if it's done right, it should then involve a testing phase as well. And ideally, as I say, that test criteria is decided before you even start the computer-aided design or design drawings, so that everyone knows what the point is of that prototype and what you're trying to test. Now, once you've tested it, you may then find, and you probably will find, there's a whole load of changes, and so you basically go back around this cycle again, back into computer-aided design, detailed design drawings, you're tweaking and updating and evolving all of that before you then make another prototype. And as I say, normally those prototypes get higher fidelity as you get more and more confident that there are going to be fewer and fewer changes. So once you have a high fidelity, nice looking prototype, if your plan is to sell to retailers, then you could try and present that to some retailers and get some feedback. Just make it very, very clear to them that this is not a sample product. It is the last, hopefully, prototype before you go into production, but that can give you vital feedback before you commit to the cost of tooling and going into manufacture. As I say, this is a good point to consider running a crowdfunding campaign, which will then reduce your overall financial risk and mean that you're getting some funds in for the last stages and getting it into production. It might be that you want a test house to assess that prototype. Sometimes this can be effective. Sometimes you actually need it in the final production materials and made in the final production processes before actually any of that testing is really that meaningful. That depends really on your product. You may want to get some final market research from your customer base. That would be advisable before you start to go into production, because it's often very costly at that stage and much harder to make changes.